Tom Connors here. How can I help you, sir?
And this is America's Newsroom. And Senator Paul and Dr. Fauci, as you know, they had this long disagreement.
And which aircraft would you prefer?
Lab or a wet market. And the senator points to this diary entry from January 2020. Fauci writes, "Now we know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier. Having said that, somewhere the virus jumped from animals to humans."
They can't jump for nothing. Get you fucking gain of function, that motherfucker.
Are you calling for the cold?
Hey, boss, how you doing? What's new? Tell me everything. But first, have you seen pre-luxury real estate is installing art studios in their properties?
How when we have so many
I know.
that emanate out of that unusual human-animal interface that we don't just shut it down. What we're going through right now is a direct result of that.
Senator Rand Paul says that is just one example of Fauci not being forthcoming with the public.
You know, one of the biggest items that we found in there was that in January of 2020, he already was acknowledging that the virus didn't originate in the marketplace. For years, the earliest people who got COVID were not associated with the marketplace. The Chinese CDC was saying this in January 2020. He knew it. He told Dear Diary, but to the public, he commissioned this paper called Proximal Origins, and in it, they go on saying it's implausible that it came from the lab.
And just moments ago on Fox and Friends, President Trump weighed in as well, saying this when asked about Fauci's contradictions.
Well, if you remember early on when it first came, I always said it came from the Wuhan labs. I never changed my tune on that. I think he said something different. He was a much bigger player in the Biden administration. I grew tired of him. It was, you remember that, you know, he wanted to close everything down. I allowed it to be up to the governors, and most or many of the Republican governors didn't want to close. And, you know, being somewhat of a federalist, the federalist theory is let the governors make a decision, and we let them. The blue states were mostly closed, and the red states were open, or they started to open very fast.
So we begin this morning with former New York Times reporter Alex Berenson, who has been a critic from right near the beginning of this over Fauci's policies. And good morning to you, Alex. Late March 2020, you jumped on this quickly. How do you look at it now?
Well, I mean, there's so much in this diary that has come out. It's the arguments over where the virus came from. There's evidence that Fauci thought very early on that this was less dangerous than most people thought publicly, but he didn't say that. He encouraged shutdowns. He encouraged very aggressive measures that seemed actually not to be necessary. And what I would say most of all, when you read the diary, and I've now read almost the whole diary, is his ego is overwhelming. He talks about how happy he is to be this important figure. He's an international celebrity, he says. He's the most important person in the United States, he says. He's obviously glorying in this. And, you know, listen, you saw some of that publicly, but he became far too big for his britches. He thought everyone in the world should listen to him, and so it was in his interest almost to make this epidemic seem worse than it was. And it's painful to see this 5 years later, 6 years later. It's also painful to realize that he was spending so much time talking to Jake Tapper and everyone else in the Washington press corps that he was not keeping up with the most advanced science on COVID, whether that was virology or epidemiology. And I mean, it's an amazing thing to realize that a handful of us on Twitter were more accurate and more forward-looking about this than the most important medical advisor in the United States. Because that guy was so in love with himself, he wasn't bothering to actually keep up with the science. It's really something.
Alex, Kennedy is one of the people that we work with here, of course, and her kids were, you know, middle school age when all of this happened, high school age, and, you know, the anger and the disappointment, the frustration is still so real. And on the lockdowns, in his diary on March 15, 2020, he said, "I spoke with Bill de Blasio, mayor of New York City, and convinced him based on what I was saying publicly. And my conversation tonight to close the NYC schools, he had already decided based on what I was saying on TV. I went on to tell him he should close the bars and restaurants in New York City." And then, fast forward 2 years, and this is what he said about never suggesting lockdown.
I wonder if you would recommend locking down schools if you had to do it all over again.
Well, you know, again, it's first of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down. You're asking me questions. You're talking about the CDC is the public health agency that uses their epidemiologists and their science-based approach to make recommendations.
Alex, parents like Kennedy who are still steaming mad about this, are looking at their kids or their kids' friends and all that they're dealing with, having to deal with that lockdown. I mean, the anger is so real still, and I wonder about the look back and how it really degraded trust in public institutions like health.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we are still dealing with a loss of trust in the CDC, in public health, and frankly, they deserve to be distrusted for the way they behave. And Anthony Fauci was an absolute partisan. You know, there's stuff in the diaries in April of 2020 where he said, well, I don't want to be, you know, basically on Trump's side, and yet being nonpartisan here. A year later, he's traveling around with Joe Biden to push vaccinations and talking about what a wonderful first lady she is. Apparently his concerns about partisanship did not extend to when there was a Democrat in the White House. And so he's done tremendous damage, and you know, Biden pardoned him at the end of his term, and so there will not be a legal reckoning for Anthony Fauci. So you wonder if he'll take record tomorrow when that hearing begins. We will wait on that. We'll watch tomorrow at 8:30 Eastern Time. Alex, go back to what we quoted a moment ago. January 26, 2020. This is very important now. In the diary, he ruled out the market theory in Wuhan. Ruled it out. He said it was not the source, it was the amplifier. Which means the lab then had to be in question. So what is the motivation not to blame the lab? But as you analyze it today, was it gain-of-function research? Was it the money that, albeit not great sums, that went to these labs around the world that were paid for by U.S. taxpayers? What's the motivation? Yeah, I mean, so first of all, let's thank Rand Paul for continuing to do this work and his staff for doing this for 5 years when a lot of people have forgotten about it, because without him, without them, we would not be talking about this today. But the motivation is, and by the way, I think we all have to believe at this point that this came out of a lab, because there's been no finding of an animal, a bat, or any other animal that had any virus that is like SARS-CoV-2, that is 99.9% the same as SARS-CoV-2. And so as the years go by, it becomes more and more likely that this is what some of us thought early on, that this came from a lab. So what's Fauci's motivation? Fauci knew that he had been funding the Wuhan lab indirectly through a guy named Peter Daszak. And he knew what that would look like if the world believed that this virus, which was already clearly a problem, which was going to shut down the world, had come from U.S. research that he had funded, research that in 2011, Anthony Fauci said, even if a virus results in a pandemic from work that is done in a lab, that work is worth doing. That was his public position, and he suddenly knew what the risks were, and he knew he had to do everything possible to hide that and to steer people away, and that is what he did, and that is why, even 5 years later, we don't have a good answer. It is really on him.
Alex, some are saying, well, why are we treading over this old ground? But to me, there is a little bit of a silver lining in that we have the diary, we have the information now, and could it be that if this were to happen again, we would either be more prepared to be more skeptical, or the government's going to be more prepared? Is there anything here that you can look at and say, it's a good thing that we know this now?
Oh yeah, I mean, if there's another COVID, if there's another sort of moderately dangerous, respiratory virus, people are not going to put up with a lockdown. And certainly in the red states, that will not happen. People will say, you know what, we've been through this, we're not going to let you scare us and continue. And honestly, before 2019, the belief was in the event of, sort of a serious but not devastating flu epidemic or other respiratory virus epidemic, you let the world go forward. You let schools stay open. You don't sacrifice everything on the altar of a few people who are really sick to begin with. And that is what we should do. And I think and hope we will remember that going forward. Can't be stampeded by fear. Alex, thanks for coming back. We'll see what we get tomorrow. Alex Barron. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox 1.
The fucking hands off! Yo, Dre. Johnny. Hold up, man. You took something that belongs to me. That's some bullshit. Got mad respect for you.
More fallout today after the release of thousands of pages from Dr. Anthony Fauci's COVID-era diary. The entries appear to show the former White House chief medical advisor holding different views in private than what he was saying in public. And it comes as senators prepare to question Fauci at a hearing on Capitol Hill tomorrow. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, here with my co-host Harris Faulkner, and also joining us today, Kennedy, host of the Kennedy Saves the World podcast, Lisa Booth, Fox News political analyst, and Griff Jenkins, co-host Fox and Friends Weekend. Now, tomorrow's hearing is expected to focus on the disparities between what Fauci wrote in his diary and what he has said publicly about the pandemic and its origins. In one entry from 2020 about a potential lab leak, Fauci wrote, quote, "They bring up the possibility that this could have been deliberately inserted and either accidentally released or deliberately released by a crazy person in the lab, the former being the most likely." Now we know the market was not the source. It was the empty had a far different take.
When I look at the scientific evidence, I don't see any evidence that's concrete at all that it's a lab leak, even though a lot of people talk about it. I still think it's a possibility, but I haven't seen any evidence.
And when writing about school closures in 2020, Fauci wrote this about New York City's then mayor. "I spoke with Bill de Blasio and convinced him, based on what I was saying publicly in my conversation tonight, to close the NY schools. He had already decided based on what I was saying on TV. I had a similar call with Ann O'Leary, the chief of staff of Governor Gavin Newsom. Ann said, based on my TV appearances, the governor has decided to close the schools in California, as well as the bars." But Fauci later denied doing anything of the sort.
I wonder if
You're
you
a
would
fucking liar.
locking down
All of them a bunch of fucking liars. You can't trust none of them funky fuckers.
Well, you know, again, it's, first of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down. You're asking me questions. You're talking about the CDC is the public health agency that uses their epidemiologists and their science-based approach to make recommendations.
And on the COVID death rate, Fauci wrote, quote, "This is acting like a bad influenza in its transmissibility, and that the denominator is much greater than 34,800.